Karoline Leavitt confronts Canadian reporter in explosive showdown. Under the sharp glow of the Washington, D.C. press hall, a Canadian reporter launches a pointed insult against the United States, mocking its values, mocking its strength, but across the room Karoline Leavitt does not flinch. She rises with precision, turns the heat back on him, and delivers a response that stuns even her critics. Security is called, and moments later the hall watches him marched out, silenced. Before we dive into what really happened, type USA in the comments if you still believe, and subscribe for more stories where truth fights back. The Washington, D.C. press hall pulsed with quiet tension. Rows of media badges glinted under the overhead lights. American flags stood firmly behind the podium, their edges unmoving, as if holding their breath. Folded press folders sat on rows of chairs, each seat filled with reporters from around the world. Some murmured into recorders, others double-checked their camera rigs, their eyes flicking between lens and script, waiting. Outside, a crowd of protesters gathered behind police barricades, some waving signs, some chanting in frustration. Inside it was quieter, but the pressure was thicker. This was not an ordinary press event. It came on the heels of a week marked by noise, rising anti-American statements from foreign publications, critical headlines questioning U.S. leadership, and coordinated media pushes that seemed less like journalism and more like ideological warfare. The coverage had been relentless. America's decline, conservative collapse, youth leadership in denial. Networks in Europe and Canada openly mocked Karoline Leavitt's election win. And yet here she was. The double doors to the press hall opened. The buzz didn't rise, it narrowed. Karoline Leavitt entered the room. No dramatic music, no loud announcement. She walked alone, calm, focused and silent. Wearing a dark blazer and minimal makeup, she looked like someone who knew what was coming, but refused to armor herself with pretense. Behind her, two aides walked without speaking. They did not carry cue cards. She did not glance back. A CNN correspondent leaned toward a colleague, whispering without taking his eyes off her. "She'll either fold or go nuclear." No one laughed. They just watched. The moderator stood at the podium, a clipboard in hand. He cleared his throat, adjusted the mic, and motioned to the far left row, where representatives from the Canadian Broadcasting Network were seated. Among them sat a journalist with a sleek black notebook already opened. His pen rested calmly. His smirk, however, was anything but. To the right, a BBC anchor scrolled on her tablet. The CTV delegate typed notes rapidly, eyes flicking between the entrance and the press list. NHK's camera light flicked on and steadied. The world was watching, not just to see if Karoline would answer questions, but to see if she could hold the room. She reached her podium. She adjusted the mic herself. And then, for one deliberate second, she scanned the entire hall, not to smile, not to pose, to measure. The moment came without warning. No hand raised, no microphone passed, no protocol followed. From the second row left, a man in a slate gray suit stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor in a deliberate act of defiance. A small black press badge clipped to his chest read, "CBC Torn Canada." He did not wait to be called. He did not apologize. He simply raised his voice and cut through the air of order like a scalpel. Why does the United States pretend to lead the free world, while its own cities rot from the inside? The room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but the posture of the press corps changed. Shoulders squared, notebooks tilted, cameras re-angled. The moderator at the podium, caught off guard, leaned forward and cleared his throat. "Sir, you'll wait to be recognized. This is not—" But it was too late. The words had landed. Across the hall, a few journalists from foreign desks raised eyebrows. Others scribbled, not waiting for permission to quote. The Canadian reporter didn't sit down. His arms were crossed now, his tone confident, measured, even smug, as if he expected no real response. Karoline did not look at him immediately. She looked at the moderator, then at the CBC badge, then slowly, without leaning, without stepping forward, she looked directly at the reporter and replied, "Leadership isn't a claim, sir. It's a result. And in this hall, we're not pretending. We're rebuilding." While others spectate, no raised voice, no retaliation, just steel. A pen clicked across the room. A BBC correspondent adjusted her audio feed. The NHK producer nodded once silently toward the sound tech at the back. The moderator recentered himself at the mic. "We'll proceed in order. Please allow recognized questions only moving forward." The Canadian reporter, now seated but still half smirking, said nothing more. But his opening shot had done what it was intended to do: introduce doubt, provoke tension, challenge authority. It had also done something unintended. It had sharpened the room. Karoline shifted her stance behind the podium. She did not look back at him again. She did not need to, because in that one moment, the Canadian reporter had entered the ring swinging, and Karoline Leavitt had just taken the first hit, without flinching. The next voice came not from the far row, but from the international press block. Emma Cross, BBC, the British reporter announced, standing slowly as her audio team raised the boom. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has praised the AI collaboration between the UK and the US. Can you speak to what that partnership looks like under your leadership? Karoline nodded, her posture steady. In the last fiscal year, the United States engaged in over $412 billion in technology-related trade, including AI-based exports. Our partnership with the UK through the Innovation Pipeline Initiative brought in over 65,000 jobs, with 40% located in the Midwest. She paused just long enough for reporters to write. We're not only exporting products, we're exporting standards, ethical ones. Our AI regulation model is being studied by 6 other nations. We're not chasing China. We're setting the pace. Several pens moved faster now. From the right side of the room, NHK's Tokyo correspondent, Jun Hashimoto, rose next. Japan's tech sector is watching U.S. manufacturing shifts very closely. Are you seeing any reversals in dependency on offshore production? Karoline didn't hesitate. Yes. In fact, Midwestern manufacturing has rebounded for 5 consecutive quarters. We've onboarded 120 new factories under the reshoring initiative. Steel, chips, clean energy parts. We've moved production home. Does it cost more? Sometimes, but it pays more too, in jobs, in stability, and in national dignity. For the first time, the energy inside the Washington, D.C. press hall was no longer tense. It was focused. A CTV journalist from Canada raised her hand next. And how do you respond to critics who say your administration focuses too heavily on tech while working-class families struggle? Karoline leaned forward slightly. We're building both. AI is not a luxury. It's the next engine of the global economy. But we're not ignoring labor. We've launched job conversion programs in coal towns and Rust Belt cities. Retraining, not replacing. That's our model. She let it sit for a moment, then delivered the closer. You want to respect the past? You build a future that includes the people who built it. That line stuck. A few heads nodded. No one clapped, but they didn't need to. The room was shifting. The same Washington, D.C. hall that had tilted towards skepticism just minutes ago was now leaning forward in interest. Karoline glanced briefly at the Canadian reporter who had thrown the first punch. He wasn't smirking anymore. He was flipping through his notes, silently. Behind the cameras, producers whispered to anchors, "Get that quote." She flipped it. "Clip that now." The moderator looked up. "Next question, please." But for the first time in the entire press conference, no one moved fast to follow up, because in that moment, Karoline Leavitt had done something few expected. She had taken control of the narrative, not with slogans, not with volume, with numbers and direction, and the room for now was listening. The silence did not last long. From the same row as before, the Canadian reporter shifted in his seat. Then slowly, deliberately, he stood again, this time with the microphone in hand. No protest came from the moderator, no warning. The room was too intrigued now. They wanted to see where this would go. He leaned in, voice calm, words sharper than ever. "Let's be honest for a second," he began. "You're not here because of foreign policy, or economic genius, or any real resume. You're here because of viral moments, hashtags, and a fan base that cheers louder than it thinks." He paused, just long enough for it to sting. "You're a glorified YouTuber in a power suit, not a leader, not even close. No movement in the room, not a cough, not a scribble, not a breath." Karoline did not blink. She didn't look to her team. She didn't smirk or shake her head. She adjusted the mic by a half inch and spoke. "You want to talk about credentials? All right, let's start there." Her tone didn't rise, but her words slowed, each one landing clean. "My grandfather served in the U.S. Army for 25 years. My father worked 2 jobs so we could afford heat in the winter. I come from a town with 1 diner, 1 high school, and a church that still rings its bell every Sunday morning." She looked out over the room, not at the reporter, but beyond him. "I didn't go viral, I went forward. When people said we had no chance, I ran. When networks said we were finished, I knocked doors. And when I got here, I didn't bring hashtags. I brought a fight for the country I love. The cameras didn't zoom. They didn't need to. I didn't inherit my seat. I earned it. And every insult like yours reminds people that this country was built by people who don't look like leaders to the press, but lead anyway. Her eyes returned to the Canadian reporter now. So, if you think I'm just a headline, think again. Because I'm the reason people outside this city still believe someone like them can step inside this room. That was it. No yelling, no insult back, no grand gesture, just history and pride, delivered without apology. The Washington, D.C. press hall remained still. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even the moderators looked unsure of what to say next. A CTV journalist glanced down at her notes and circled a line 3 times. Behind the cameras, a CNN anchor whispered to his producer, "She just bought herself the room." The Canadian reporter sat back. His pen never moved. The smirk had vanished. For the first time since the conference began, Karoline Leavitt was not responding. She was commanding. This was not about a soundbite anymore. This was a moment of legacy, and the hall felt it. The next hand that rose came from the center row. It belonged to an American journalist, not from a cable news powerhouse, but from a national paper with readers in every diner, truck stop, and gas station across the Midwest. She spoke without theatrics. She did not challenge. She questioned. Gas prices have gone up 7% in 3 months. Groceries are becoming unreachable for working families. Rents climbing and credit cards are maxed. What, in real terms, have you done? No bias, no spin, just wait. The room reset itself. Notebooks opened again. Lenses focused. Audio. Levels adjusted. Karoline nodded. Once. Slowly. She did not sigh. She did not pivot. She stood taller, not in defiance but in duty. "That question," she said, "deserves the truth." And then, without hesitation, she delivered it. Point 1. Energy relief. We launched the Energy Stability Act last quarter. It redirects $12 billion into domestic production credits for small refiners. That means more supply, more jobs, and a limit on foreign dependence. By winter, we project a 9% drop in national gas prices. Not a theory, a timeline, because families can't live off promises. Point 2. Tax reform. We passed the middle-class tax cut framework 2 months ago. It lifts pressure off families earning under $100,000, expanding deductions for dependents, lowering payroll strain. It's not flashy, but it means an extra $1,800 per household, and that's real relief, not press release numbers. Point 3. Housing development. Our National Housing Acceleration Plan broke ground in 41 cities. 300,000 new homes, 120,000 already under construction, and yes, American labor, American materials. This isn't overnight work, but it's underway and it's moving fast. She stopped, then added one final line, not from a brief, not from a memo, from somewhere deeper. We're not trying to save face, we're trying to save people. The reporter nodded once, wrote the last line down, said nothing more. Across the Washington, D.C. press hall, reactions returned to motion. Pens moved. Cameras re-angled. A producer whispered, "That's going viral." The Canadian reporter, still silent, still watching, but even he knew. This wasn't spin, it was substance. Karoline stepped back a half step from the mic. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw blame. She accepted the weight and put numbers behind the vision. It had been quiet for a while, too quiet. The Canadian reporter had not spoken since his last failed jab, but he was still there, leaning back in his seat, arms crossed, eyes scanning for an opening. And now, he found it. No microphone in hand, no hand raised. He simply stood, again, and this time he raised his voice without warning or invitation. America is not leading, it's collapsing. A hollow empire clinging to a flag and a myth. You call this strength? The words fell like glass. No one moved. The Washington, D.C. press hall froze. Not a whisper, not a scribble, not a breath. Even the moderators didn't respond. Cameras locked into place. Journalists stopped mid-sentence. The BBC anchor lowered her pen and stared forward. The NHK tech whispered, "Are we live?" The reporter stood firm, as if daring Karoline to strike back, but Karoline didn't blink. She didn't raise her voice. She stepped forward, and her silence was louder than the insult. She looked to the moderator, then to the audience. Then, finally, to the reporter, and then she spoke. This is a hall for questions, for disagreements, even for hard truths, but it is not a hall for insults. Not against the flag, not against the people who serve under it, not while I stand here. A pause. She didn't flinch. Security. The word didn't echo. It landed. 2 uniformed officers moved without hesitation. The reporter took one step back, but he didn't resist. He looked around the room as if expecting someone to intervene. No one did. As the officers approached, Karoline added one more sentence. Not shouted, not scripted. You are free to criticize our policies, but you will not desecrate the country that gave you this microphone. The officers reached him, one hand on the shoulder. The other gestured toward the exit. He still said nothing, but the look on his face was no longer confidence, it was disbelief. He was being removed in front of international media, in front of his own crew, in front of the American people. The camera panned out, and then from the back corner of the hall a single voice rose. USA, then another. USA, then a dozen more, then the entire room. USA, USA, USA. The chant wasn't forced, it wasn't coached, it was electric, and as the reporter disappeared through the side door surrounded by guards, the sound only grew louder. Karoline stood tall behind the podium, not chanting, just listening. She did not raise her hand to calm the crowd. She did not smile. She simply waited for the wave to crest, for the pride to pulse through every corner of the Washington, D.C. press hall. And when the chant faded, she leaned back into the mic. Let it be known, we do not silence opinions, we silence dishonor. And if you question what we stand for, look around this hall today. Silence returned. But now, it was a silence filled with something else. Respect. That moment did more than remove a critic. It cemented Karoline's position, not just as a speaker in the room but as the one commanding it, and the title had fulfilled itself. Karoline Leavitt had kicked the Canadian reporter out of the hall for insulting the United States. The press conference had changed, not in tone, in temperature, because now the world was not just watching, it was paying attention. The energy inside the Washington, D.C. press hall had shifted again. The chant had faded. The Canadian reporter was gone, but something heavier now hung in the air. Not outrage, not tension, something simpler, attention. All eyes returned to the front. Karoline Leavitt did not step back from the podium. She stepped into it, and for the first time that day, she did not speak to the room as a combatant. She spoke as a citizen. You saw what happened. I don't need to repeat it. But I'll say this, America isn't made from comfort. It's made from comebacks. She paused. Not for effect, for honesty. Yes, we've made mistakes. Our economy has stumbled. Our streets need repair. Our people are hurting. But we don't kneel. We don't crumble. And we sure as hell don't take insults in silence. The room was quiet, but not stiff, engaged. She took a breath, let her voice widen. From the founding fathers who inked independence with trembling hands, to factory workers who clock in before dawn to feed a family on the edge, this nation was never about polish. It was about perseverance. She looked across the rows, now, at the anchors, the scribes, the skeptics, the allies. We're not perfect, but we are proud, and we don't take cues from the critics in the corner. We take direction from the dreams of the people who built this land with their hands, not hashtags. The Washington, D.C. press hall sat still again, but this time it wasn't silence born of shock, it was focus. She continued, this time slower, firmer. The men and women who served, who built, who marched, who voted, they didn't do it for applause. They did it because they believed in something bigger than themselves. And that's what I believe in. Not power, not image, but people. The teacher in Pennsylvania who buys pencils with her own paycheck. The mom in Texas who skips lunch so her kids don't skip dinner. The welder in Michigan who hasn't missed a shift in 19 years. They don't get invited to halls like this, but they are the reason halls like this exist. You could hear a pin drop. Even the CBC crew in the back had stopped adjusting their audio feeds. Karoline didn't. Look at her notes. She didn't have any. Her voice carried now, not louder but wider. We are 50 states, 330 million stories, and one fight. The fight to build, not bow. A few reporters looked around. One CTV journalist had tears in her eyes. A BBC anchor simply nodded once, writing nothing, just listening. So when someone tells us we're collapsing, we invite them to walk our streets. visit our schools, talk to our farmers, our nurses, our soldiers. And when they say we're clinging to our flag, we tell them, you're right. We cling to it because it clings to us. Through war, through recession, through doubt. Because it still means something. She placed her hand on the podium now. Flat, steady. That flag is still worth standing under. The room exhaled, and then she closed it. So here's my promise. We will get better. We will grow stronger. And no matter how loud the critics scream, we will never stop standing back up. She stepped back, not with drama, with purpose. And slowly, as if led by instinct, the room stood with her. The Washington, D.C. press hall, filled with skeptics, foreign press, hostile reporters, and even silent critics, stood, not as a performance, as a recognition. A leader had just spoken, and for once there was nothing left to ask. By nightfall, the headlines had crossed borders. What started as a standard political Q&A session inside the Washington, D.C. press hall had become a flashpoint, not just for American politics, but for international perception. No media outlet ignored it. None agreed on all the details, but they all agreed on one thing. Karoline Leavitt had owned the room. The New York Times ran its morning digital edition with a firm, simple title, Karoline Leavitt holds the line under pressure. The lead described her as unshaken by insult, elevated by restraint. It went on to write, the D.C. press hall witnessed something rare, a young leader using calm strength in the face of direct provocation and walking away with command, not chaos. BBC World posted a mid-evening segment titled, American Leader Commands the Hall. The anchor opened the broadcast noting, in a world saturated with noise, Leavitt's silence was her sharpest weapon. Their report highlighted her dismissal of the insult, her grounding in values, and her emotionally charged unity speech, calling it a moment of national reconnection. Fox News took a more direct approach, leading with, Canadian reporter removed for insulting. USA, their on-air headline bar read, Disrespect meets consequence. Their evening panel praised Karoline's refusal to allow anti-American rhetoric in the room. She didn't yell, she didn't posture, she set the line, and she defended it. Across the border, the CA Times, Canadian Atlantic Times published a feature story titled, What Happened Inside Washington? Their take was more reserved, questioning the tone of both sides but admitting Karoline Leavitt controlled the room with a grip far beyond her years. The reporter's removal was decisive, not chaotic. The piece ended with, Leadership is sometimes visible in silence. Leavitt proved that. NHK Tokyo aired a subtitled segment the following morning called, DC Exchange Raises Global Questions. The voiceover noted, while tensions rose, diplomacy held. The American officials' restraint contrasted sharply with provocation, creating a clear image of control. Even Al Jazeera covered it. Their late-night opinion piece read, A shift in the American right. They framed Karoline's tone as a break from bombast, leaning into facts and pride rather than rage. Social media amplified the headlines. Clips of her quote, You will not desecrate the country that gave you this microphone, racked up millions of views overnight. The chant, USA, USA, trended globally on X, formerly Twitter. Hashtags like Donner Hall Moment and Line Held made rounds across YouTube and TikTok. Memes surfaced. Commentators debated. But behind every joke, every argument, and every post was a central truth. Karoline Leavitt had turned a hostile press moment into a national statement, and the world had taken notice. What happened inside that Washington, D.C. hall was more than a debate. It was more than politics, more than policy, more than another day in front of flashing cameras and folded press badges. It was a moment, a line drawn, a reminder that in a time when noise often drowns truth, when shouting replaces substance, someone stood still and stood for something. Karoline Leavitt did not win that room because she shouted louder. She won it because she refused to bow when it mattered most. When the insult came, not just to her, but to every flag that has draped a soldier's coffin, to every citizen who still says pledge without flinching, she did not explode. She invited the silence. She held it, and then she answered it, not with rage but with resolve. And when she said, You will not desecrate the country that gave you this microphone, she wasn't just speaking to one reporter, she was speaking to a generation, one that has been told to apologize for their patriotism, to doubt their history, to shrink when they should stand. She told them, We are not perfect, but we are proud. And we never stop standing back up. And in that line there was no script. There was only truth. Because across that room, from CBC to CTV, from BBC to Fox, no one questioned what they saw. They saw a leader who didn't flinch, a voice that didn't waver, a spine that didn't bend. In that moment, Karoline Leavitt didn't just defend America. She reminded the world why it still matters, why the flag still stands, why the anthem still plays, why the words "we the people" still carry weight. And so as the doors closed behind that Canadian reporter, as the chant of USA echoed through the marble hallways of Washington, as headlines circled the globe, it wasn't just about one confrontation. It was about courage, clarity, and conviction. So if you're watching this, if you felt that moment, not just in your head but in your chest, then say it. Say it in the comments. Say it to your friends. Say it to the next person who asks why you still believe. Type USA if you still believe in this country. Subscribe for more stories where leadership means something again. Because the world may forget headlines, but it never forgets when one voice stood when it counted most.